Welcome everyone to this webinar with the topic drone-based plant counts, assessments and field trials. So my name is Igor and I'm a CEO and founder of Solvi. And with me today is Boris Calvier from MAS Seeds. So I visited Boris a couple of weeks ago in south of France at one of their trial locations. That's where the image is from. And it was really fascinating to hear their story, how they have been increasingly using drone imagery in their work since 2015, so almost 10 years now. So I was very happy when Boris agreed to join this webinar and share their knowledge and experience with us. So Boris, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. So yeah, my name is Boris Calvet. I work at a company called MAS Seeds, which is part of a bigger group that is located in the southwest of France. Our company breeds, produce and sells corn, sunflowers, seeds. We are mainly present in Europe, but we also have subsidiaries in Africa and one in Mexico. And I've been working there for 10 years in that company. I spent a few years as a trailing technician, so really planting and harvesting. Then I've spent some time coordinating our European corn testing network, and now I switch to data analysis with a specific focus on drone data at the moment.
Great, thank you, Boris, for joining us. So let's move on to the agenda. So I will start talking in the beginning about the different hardware that you can use specifically for the field trials, and then how to collect quality data, because the analytics that you can then extract from the data are just as good as your data. So that's really important. Then also a quick workflow, how to practically take the imagery that you collected with the drone and process it with Solvi, generate plant counts in corn crop, and then generate plot boundaries and extract plot level metrics. And after that, Boris will continue and tell us how they are working with drone imagery in their field trials and show us a couple of examples from corn and sunflower crops. And in the end, we will have a Q&A session where we'll try to answer your questions. So during the presentations, please post your questions in the Q&A tool here, and we'll get back to them after the presentations. This webinar is also recorded, so the recording will be available afterwards. So if you need to move on and can stay with us until the end of the webinar, that's not a problem. All right, so for those who don't know about Solvi, I'm the founder, as I mentioned. I founded the company back in 2015, and it was born out of the collaboration with the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, or shortly SLU. Back in the day, things were much more complicated, and Boris probably can relate to that. You had to assemble the drones yourself, mount the cameras manually. But then also when it comes to software for processing of the imagery, there were not as many solutions back in the day. So that's kind of how the idea for Solvi was born. Then Solvi was released in 2017. And after that, we have been developing together with our customers different tools and features to extract as much information as possible from the drone imagery. And one of the flagship features of our software is Plant AI, which allows you to identify different types of crops, but not only crops. It can be also weeds in the imagery by fine-tuning our general agricultural AI model. And the cool part about this tool is that it doesn't require you to have knowledge about machine learning and AI. You can use really easy to use interface to create examples, train an AI model, and then detect different plants, estimate their sizes, and do a lot more. So we will have a few examples to show today. And then another area of analytics that we do is called zonal statistics. So that's tool specifically for the field trials that allows users to create plot boundaries and then extract different metrics like NDVI and DRE values, plant counts, canopy cover, plot heights, and more. So we'll get back to that today as well. But first, if you're new to using drones in agricultural research, or maybe considering to upgrade your existing hardware, you're probably asking the question which drone or sensor you should use. When it comes to drones, there are in general two types of drones: fixed-wing drones and multi-rotor drones. Most are probably familiar with the second type. Fixed-wing drones are really good at mapping large areas. So maybe not as applicable for the field trials, because field trials usually have quite small area. Even the largest trials are just a couple of hectares usually in size. But with fixed-wing drones, you can map hundreds of hectares in a single flight with a flight time of 62 minutes and more. But there are some limitations. Fixed-wing drones can only fly at lowest maybe at 50, 60 meters, because they need quite a lot of space for turns and navigation. And as a result, the resolution of the imagery that you can collect with them is usually quite limited. So anything between 3 to 10 centimeter pixels. Multi-rotor drones, on the opposite, are much more flexible and easier to use platform. Anyone can, with a little training, be up in the air and fly these drones. The flight time is usually significantly shorter, somewhere about 20 to 40 minutes. As a result, you can cover smaller areas, but in most cases, it's more than sufficient for field trials. And the good thing is with multi-rotor drones is that you can fly at virtually any altitude, anything from typically 10 to 120 meters. In some research projects, we've been even collecting still images at as low altitude as low as 3 to 5 meters. So it's really a flexible platform. And depending on your use case, you can use it for many different applications. But the drones are really just the vehicle of carrying the camera, and that's what really enables the analytics. When it comes to camera in general, in agricultural research, RGB and multispectral cameras are useful. There are more advanced hyperspectral cameras, but those usually are much more expensive and have much more complex workflow when it comes to processing the imagery with them. The RGB cameras, most people are familiar with, so they capture the visual spectrum of light and capture visual patterns in crop growth. They usually have high resolution, much higher resolution than multispectral sensors, so that's why they're useful in seed and crop protection trials, where a high level of detail is very important, for example, for plant counting applications. But also can be used for other different types of analytics, like canopy cover, weed cover, measuring crop height, and even counting small objects like flowers in oilseed rape. Multispectral cameras like MicaSense, Altum, Parrot, Sequoia, and the multispectral sensors mounted on Mavic 3M capture lower resolution imagery, but they capture also the spectrums of light that are not visible to human eye. That's why they're useful, for example, in nitrogen fertilizer trials, where you can use indices like NDVI and DRE that can correlate with nitrogen uptake, protein content to crops, but also can be used for plant counts. It's just a matter of picking the right altitude for the flight to make sure that what you want to detect and analyze in the imagery is well visible. So I would say that for most use cases on agriculture, and we process like thousands of data sets, and we see the emerging pattern that Mavic 3M has really become a go-to sensor, camera and sensor and the drone to collect the imagery and then do all different types of analytics. So if you're considering and just starting out in this field, I think that's a solid choice. And once you outgrow it, you can look into other solutions. So now I'd like to share a few tips on how to successfully collect the drone imagery so that you provide quality input for the analytics. So number one, set the field boundaries for your flight correctly. This sounds pretty obvious, but again, we process so much data, and we quite often see flights like in the bottom right here, when a user flies just a single flight path with good overlap, it looks like in this specific case. But still, that's not really good data for the analytics because the algorithms that stitch the imagery into the maps try to find common features in overlapping images, and usually just frontal overlap is not sufficient. You want to have side overlap as well. So when setting the boundaries for the flight, and the flight planning app will automatically typically show you how the drone will flight. I would recommend setting the boundaries so that the first and last flight path goes at least along the edges of the field trial, like we see here. Ideally, even outside of the field trial, so that you get adequate image coverage over the whole trial area. Number two, choose the right flight altitude, and that's probably the most common question that we get. How high should I fly? And we have a good article on our blog that goes into the detail. But the short answer, it depends on the use case. So depending on what kind of insights you are looking to extract from the imagery, you need to choose the flight altitude accordingly. If you're looking to the plant counts, it will usually require quite high imagery resolution, so anything from 0.2 to 1 centimeters per pixel. And if you use Mavic 3 multispectral, it will typically translate to a flight altitude of 10 to 30 meters. Here on the right, we have two examples with image on the left with corn trial at, I think, V2 growth stage, where the imagery was collected at 30 meters altitude, 1 centimeter per pixel resolution. And we can see that although counting algorithms manage to detect the plants, they also detect a lot of other stuff in between the rows. And that's because there is just too little pattern visible in the imagery for the algorithms to differentiate crops from, for example, weeds. And on the opposite, on the right, we have actually image from one of Boris trials, flown at 20 meters, 0.6 centimeter per pixels. And we can see, although there are a lot of weeds in between the rows, the algorithms do a pretty good job of differentiating between them. And that's because you can clearly see what is a plant or what is a weed. So as a rule of thumb, if you are not sure which altitude, which resolution you should be aiming at, and then which altitude to choose, we have this formula that we have seen works pretty well. So to calculate target GSD, ground sampling distance, divide the plant size, so the diameter of the plant, by 30 pixels. And that means that each plant will be represented by 30 pixels in the imagery. So that will provide enough level of detail for the algorithms to train and adjust to specific crop. So for example, if the plants are roughly 10 centimeters in size, you would be looking at the resolution of 0.33 centimeters per pixels. And in the flight planning app, you will usually see which GSD you get when you adjust the altitude. And I think even with Mavic 3M, you can input the desired resolution and it will set your altitude accordingly. For trials in cereal crops, for example, like in the image below, where you are looking to just calculate like average MDRE value or NDVI value, you don't really need high resolution, and then you can fly with multispectral camera as high as maybe 80, 90, even 120 meters, because a few centimeters here and there doesn't really matter much. Number three, set sufficient overlap. So as I mentioned before, overlap is really important for successful stitching of the imagery. As a rule of thumb, I would recommend going with 80% front overlap and 70% side overlap. If you're mapping really large area, you can try to lower front overlap to 75, maybe even 70%. But the lower the overlap, the higher risk that the imagery will not stitch well, or you will see some sort of artifacts after the imagery is processed. So if the flight time allows, go with 80 frontal and 70 side overlap, and you should be safe. If you're looking to do the height measurements, so that's one of the metrics that we can extract in Solvi, then the quality of the elevation model is really important. And elevation map is another product that is created during the stitching. So it's not just the visual map of the field, but also the elevation map. And the quality elevation map directly depends on the resolution of the imagery. So you want to fly lower if you need to capture high level of detail in elevation. but also the overlap. So if you're looking to do height measurements, you might want to increase it up to 80–85% in both front and side overlap. Number 4, choose the flight direction and speed of the flight. So if the trial is like very long and thin in the area, like in the top, in the images here on the right, it's usually a good idea to fly along the longest side of the area. That way the drone will make fewer turns and will fly the trial much faster. So the more turns the drone makes, obviously, the longer time it takes. But then you also want to consider the direction of the wind during the flight. So you don't want to fly against the wind or with the wind, because that can result in inconsistent overlap between the images. So best is to fly so that the wind is from the perpendicular or blows from the side. Also, depending on the frontal overlap that you choose and the altitude that you fly, the flight planning app will usually suggest a range of speeds that you can fly at. If you're doing plan counts, it's really important that the imagery is as crisp and sharp. So I would recommend then staying on the lower side and fly lower and collect better imagery. And also another limiting factor of the flight speed is the speed at which the sensors can capture the imagery and save it to the memory card. So if you're looking to the counts and only really interested in RGB imagery that has higher resolution, you can turn off the multispectral sensors and that way avoid writing a lot of data. And at the same time, the drone will be able to fly faster. And finally, number 5 is the camera settings. So for RGB cameras, I would recommend, unless you are an expert and can really tweak like the shutter speed and all that, I would recommend to keep most settings on auto and not change them much. The only thing you might want to tweak is the white balance and change it from auto to cloudy or sunny, just so that it's consistent throughout the whole flight, so that if the light conditions change, the imagery doesn't turn out to be brighter in some spots of the field and then darker in other. When it comes to multispectral imagery, it's not really camera settings, but with multispectral imagery, you always want to calibrate the imagery, and this is something that is done after the flight. And that's done to make sure that the data is comparable within the flight, but also across multiple flights and locations. So we have done a whole webinar with the Swedish University of Agriculture a couple of weeks ago, and it's available on our YouTube channel if you want to dive deeper into this. But in general, there are two methods. You can either use reflectance panels or DLS, or you can combine both. We have seen that calibration panel provides most consistent results. So if you're looking to compare the data between the flights, between the sensors, even compare with satellite imagery, that's the preferable way of calibrate the data. Now, Mavic 3 doesn't ship with a panel, so I would recommend to always calibrate them with DLS because calibration with DLS might be not as consistent, but it's much better to calibrate with it than not calibrate at all. So that's it for these 5 tips for successful imagery collection. And now I'd like to show a practical example of, like, once you've collected the drone imagery, what does the workflow look like for processing it into maps, then generating the counts, and then extracting plot level data from it. So I will head over here to the browser. And the first step is to upload the imagery. So Solvi is a cloud-based service, meaning that all the processing is happening in the cloud. So the only thing you really need to do is copy over the imagery from the SD card to your computer, then select them here. The tool will show you the preview of where the images are taken to make sure that you are uploading right imagery. And then you just hit upload here and can actually, if it's multispectral imagery, you can actually choose if you want to use DLS for calibration or not. Otherwise, we support the panels. But once the imagery is uploaded, it's the processing starts automatically and you get notification when it's processed and then is ready to analyze. Here I have one example of processed imagery from a quant trial from one of Boris' trials. So if we zoom in, we can see how great this imagery is. So the objective here was to, if I'm not mistaken, to do the plant counts. So the field was flown at 20 meters, resolution was 0.6 centimeters per pixel, and in total about 2,000 images were collected. And you can see just how clearly these plants are visible in the imagery. So that's kind of a perfect use case, an ideal scenario for the plant counts. So once the imagery is processed, we can now generate the counts. Here in our Plant AI tool, the workflow is following. You provide a few examples of the plants that you want to identify. So this is one example. This is another one. Now, this field had quite a lot of weeds. The interesting thing about these examples that you provide is that you are teaching the tool both to focus on a specific type of crop, but also to ignore everything else. So everything within this example area that is not circled in with the circles is also used to teach the AI as something that should be ignored. And in some cases, if you want, for example, to calculate the weed cover, you can do the opposite. So you can teach the tool to ignore the plants and instead focus on weeds. So by providing a few examples like this, you kick off then the detection where you choose a few parameters and tell the tool what kind of outputs you want. You can also choose to calculate the distances between the plants by providing the direction of the rows. And then you just click detect. The process takes anything from 10-15 minutes, maybe to half an hour, depending on the size of the field. Behind the scenes, the AI model is fine-tuned and then is being run on the whole field. Once it's ready, you get to preview the results, and it shows you. So this is kind of the iterative process. You first add a couple of examples, see the results, and then improve the accuracy in the places where it's needed. And in this step, it shows you actually the preview of what the latest detection looks like and what the previous detection looks like. So here we had, with the blue dots, some weeds detected in the previous detection, and with few more examples, the tool learned to actually ignore them and just focus on the plants. So once the plant counts are processed, the final step is to create the plot boundaries and generate plot level metrics. So number of plants in the specific trials, it's interesting to look into number of plants and also plant density. Now, this is quite a complex plot layout here in this trial, and Boris will tell us a bit more about how they are generating the plots. So the option they use is to just import here all the plot boundaries from shapefile or KML. And if we click here on the different plots here, we can see the different metrics, and the numbers show the plant density, but we can also switch and show number of plants in each individual plot, and different colors also illustrate the plots with fewer plants, and the dark green colors show plots with where there are more plants. But if your trial layout is not as complex, you can actually use the plot creation tools available in Solvi, where you essentially provide the dimensions of the plots, the gaps between them, and then match them with the imagery. And once you're done with that, you can just generate quickly a number of rows and columns that cover the whole trial. And after that, the next step is to choose what kind of naming pattern you want to use. So either row or column number or sequential pattern. And once you save the results here, then you just choose what kind of metrics you want to calculate for each individual plot. So it can be the raw reflectance values in different bands. It can be different types of vegetation indices. If you generated plant counts, you can calculate plant counts metrics, do height calculations, even canopy cover, and so on. So once that's you've chosen what you want to calculate, you just click calculate, and the metrics are calculated. And here in the similar way, we see now the median NDVI value for the individual plots. And then final step is to, in most cases, you want to export the data in Excel format so that you can work further with your custom analytics tools. So that's simply done here. And the exported data looks like this. So for every plot here, you get all these metrics exported in one single place. So that's pretty much it. So it's really like straightforward process, and from uploading the imagery to generating the counts to generating plot level metrics, it may take, what is it, 2-3 hours in total. So you can have the results available essentially the same day. And now we will switch over to Boris and learn more about how they're using this kind of tools in their research. Boris?
Yeah, thank you, Igor. So I'll try to switch to my screen now. Hopefully you're seeing it. So
yes, we can see a screen now.
Good. I'll just start with a couple slides just to remind you of the activity we're doing, and just give some sense of what we're doing in general, and then we'll dive maybe on one specific field to show you a bit more detail, the technical aspect of it. That's not the first one, sorry. So the company activity, so MAS Seeds run varietals. I say varietal because we're testing hybrids or genetics in general. We are not testing any other product than that. And we have a testing network of 8 stations, which are on 7 countries. We have around 200 microplot fields, and in total, we have around 300,000 microplots across Europe and Mexico. Just keep in mind, we do not own 100% of these locations, so that's not actually the number of locations we have to process using Solvi. It's, I would say, approximately half of it. So maybe we have 100 fields or something to compute each year. We also have some nurseries, which are usually smaller than the trailing field, but require very often more work and more precise metrics. A little bit of history also about our experience with drones. The first contact with drone was in 2015. So I think about when Solvi started also. We had the very first experience with drones which were fixed wings, and the images were quite disappointing, honestly, because they were flying very fast and very high. And so, as Igor said, the resolution was not there. It was around multiple centimeters per pixel, and that could be enough to count sunflower fields, for example, because sunflower plants tend to be quite big, but for corn it was not nearly enough. And also the price was very high. At the moment, it was 40,000 euros for a drone. That's what we were offered. So yeah, that was definitely not worth it at the beginning. So we just kept an eye on what was going on, but not really moved in with the technology until 2019, I think, where we decided to try different type of drones, so quadcopters, so rotary drones. And the very first one we tried was the Mavic 2 Pro from DJI in 2019. So it was very inexpensive compared to what we've been seeing up to there. That one was about 2,000 euros for the drone plus multiple batteries. And all of a sudden, it was a lot more doable for us. And also, we experienced a very big improvement in image quality based, as Igor said, just on the fact that it was flying a lot lower and a lot slower also. So it was a lot better, and all of a sudden, it was very much usable for us. We kept working with that, and then recently, as Igor also said, DJI created the Mavic 3M. So it was the 3, right? So we're working with the 2. So it was a new DJI drone, and they created one that was dedicated to agriculture. So we decided to move to that one because it had everything we needed. Multispectral imagery. That's not something we use 100% of the time at the moment, but that's very promising for the future. And also it adds RTK GPS. This is very useful for us because as you've seen, the plot boundaries can be quite complicated. And so we do not want to spend a lot of time drawing that over all the flights. So our goal is really to do that once on the first flights, and then all new flights that are performed on the same field are supposed to be well overlapping the first one, so that we do not have to draw the shapes again. And that's possible with RTK GPS. So that's definitely why they included that on the agricultural drone, I guess. And you can also fly longer with one battery with the Mavic 3M. So that also is very important. You'll see later, but we have quite big fields. Igor was saying that using this type of drone, you could fly for 20 to 40 minutes for a field. That's correct, but for quite a small field, if you have 15 hectares and you want to fly low, like 20 meters for counting, then very often you can fly for 1.5 hours or something like that. And to do that, you need batteries that last long. So that improvement was also very important compared to the Mavic 2 that we're working with. So we bought total of 7 of them last year, and now all the stations are equipped with one. Just a quick example of the metrics we're interested in. Plant counts, of course, that's the first thing. Then canopy cover is also interesting for us. Heterogeneity, I'll try to show later what I'm speaking of with heterogeneity. Proximity of empty rows is also something we like to track. For example, if there's one row that is missing that has no plants, we know that the plots which are directly next to that row will have more light. So that will also come into effect at the very end when we harvest everything, and we'll know that microplot will have had more lights, so the yield will naturally be higher. And that's not something we want to consider because we are really trying to have a look at the genetic aspect of it. So that's also something we watch out for. The width overlap also is important. The plant height, although we still struggling to get 100% reliable metrics on that one for corn. We'll see later. And I don't know, I have a mistake there, sorry. We also are interested in senescence, so the plant drying speed. We want to know if plants are drying faster or not, because very often that is also genetic. So that's something we measure. And then also we want to measure sunflower flowering dates. And for that, we can kind of use Plants AI and in the tricky way, I guess, because we are teaching it to identify the sunflower heads instead of the actual plants. And using that, you can actually derive the number of sunflower heads at different times if you fly like every 2 days or something, and you can get the final flowering date for all the varieties that you have using this. Just an example. Also, I would like to remind you of the activity-specific problems that we have. So the problems that we have that really are linked to the activity type that we have. The first one is, again, the size and number of trialing fields, because we have fields ranging from 2 hectares to 25 hectares. And very often something that is very easy to do on a 2-hectare field is not really easy to do on a 25-hectare field, because everything grows, flight time, then in the quantity of images generated, the size of everything. And also the fact that we have nearly 100 fields to fly. So we also, and they are coming from different countries. So that also is quite specific. It's not really just one research station with a field right next to the office. So yeah, it's quite different. Flying time can be long, I said that, and also the size of the data generated. Something did not include maybe there also that is important is the fact that the people actually flying the drones are not necessarily experienced researchers or people that are really keen to informatics or stuff like that. It's very often technicians. So it needs to be also easy to understand. And yeah, and I think DJI with the Mavic 3M especially did a very, very big work on that. And the drones are very easy to use, and that changes everything for us. Also, the complexity of the field, again, as you said, the plot boundaries were quite complicated in the example that Igor showed. It can get even more complicated. That's a bit of an extreme, but that's maybe the most complex field we have this year. Every square there is a plot, and all the squares which are orange there are supposed to be borders, so are supposed to be ignored. And as you can see, you have some very strange shapes which are linked to the fact that it's got center pivot irrigation on that field. But yeah, that is very complicated to place. So that also is very specific to what we're doing. And then again, the fact that we have different teams on different countries, so possibly different languages and teams with more days experience. That is really specific to what we're doing. And then I just maybe wanted to show you a quick example. Maybe also speak about the API of Solvi. Maybe that's a bit advanced, but maybe you would be interested in that also. I am interested, I know. I'll just show you how I use it quickly. And also maybe a real quick, like real life example. It's a very small field. It looks like this. So it's definitely not the kind of field I was showing before, but it's just faster to show you. So maybe I can switch to browser myself again and show you a couple of things. So regarding the API from Solvi, the API allows us to, for example, query the whole complete list of all the fields which are either processed or being processed. When I say field, I actually mean projects, so flights. And I can know the farms that I've declared in Solvi. Inside the farms are fields, and inside of these fields are different projects, so different flights performed potentially on the same field. And as I said, we have 100 fields, and we'll have several flights for each of these 100 fields. So in the end, I will have lots of flights. So to keep track of that, I could go to Solvi interface and go through all the farms and check if there is, for example, any new field, any new flight that I need to process. That could be very long, and I'm sure I will be missing some. And also, if I want to know, for example, if plant counts were officially done for that field, I would need to open the field and check if plant counts was done, etc. When we have hundreds of fields, that really can take time. So thanks to the API, we can get all of that information directly, transform that as a table, and I can also use that to link all of these fields to my database where I have all the fields, because we use that database for sowing and everything. I have the list of fields I am expecting to fly. So I can link the two. And thanks to that, I can reuse that API call several times a day, for example, and check if there are any new things that need to be processed. So that's just an example. So far, we had 50 flights this year. It's only the beginning because the planting season was late, yeah. But we already have 50, and you see, for example, that the top 3 are currently being processed. So that means that the photos were uploaded, but the image, the final orthomosaic was not processed still. So it's not available, but I know they will be. And that's also is not something I can do through the Solvi interface. So that's very interesting to me. As for all the others, I know that they are processed, for example. I know if the plant counts are published or if they are not published. If they are published, I know that I can extract the metrics. If they are not, I know that I need to wait for the people to create all the plant counts, etc. I have the ID of the project and also its name, also the farm it's in, etc., etc. And I can add any comments I want. So that's very useful for me. Then, if we move on to a practical example, so this is a small field we had in Germany. It was flown a few days ago, maybe last week or something. I'm showing you purposefully a very, very good flight. All right, it was flown at 15 meters, and the image is very, very crisp. Keep in mind that's not the case for all the fields, right? Some flights are lots less precise than this one. I just wanted to show you also how we use the annotate and measure. We use the people that perform the flights to actually tell us where the field starts, because for me, I have to process all these fields. I do not know all the fields of all the stations and where they start and how many rows there is the beginning, etc. So I need people to indicate that to me. So we use annotations for that. So if you zoom in here, you can see the people added an annotation to tell me when the first border row is and where the first actual row of the trailing field is. We use also the field boundary so that I know exactly where is the interesting area. So this is what we use. So we start with that. Then I will not go again through all the processes of creating a plant detections. Igor just did it. Just to show you here, again, we do not do that on all the fields, but on this one, for example, we would do it. We have actually created 2 separate detections, one for the crop and one for the weeds. You'll see that field has big areas with weeds, like here, for example. And if I show you the plant counts, this is the detection of weeds. So it's a detection that is a bit specific to us. We are not circling all individual weed plants. We are just drawing a freeform polygon over the areas where we are weeds, and we are also asking Solvi to give us just an area and not a point for each individual plant. So that's one type of detection. And we combine that with another type of detection that I'm showing you there because I cannot show you the two at the same time. But that's the other detection we have. This one is really on the plants. And as I told you, this field is very easy. The image is very, very nice. As Igor was saying, you can see here that at first he was counting some weeds, so we added some examples. And on the second flight, it was just ignoring that weed. So yeah, we have actually 2 detections on this. And then come the zonal statistics. So these are the plots that I've placed. I have borders, as I said, and also experiments. The borders are called obstacles there, and also the experiments. Usually I just upload the plots from the experiments. And that's it. So that's the beginning for me. We are basically using Solvi at the moment to do all the heavy work, meaning creating the auto mosaic, creating the plant counts, which is very hard to do, and also computing any vegetation index. And that's it, basically. And once we have this, I can just extract these different things. So the auto mosaic also does not statistics, not necessarily, because you'll see I draw them from outside. And then the plant counts, and possibly also the two annotations to be able to see where I'm at. And this is where I usually switch to QGIS. I don't know how to say in English. So I guess most of you know this software, very, very useful software, and free. So yeah, that's great. And these are all so if I go back, this is what I start with. I'm starting with the auto mosaic from Solvi on the background, and the two annotations I have on where is the first border and where is the first row of the trials. Then I also download the GLI, so that's a vegetation index. Looks like this on QGIS. I apply a threshold to that to get only the pixels which are above a certain value for that vegetation index. So usually I get the plants. You see, as that field is quite dirty, I am also getting weeds, but I'm mostly getting the plants, and I can really find where the rows are. Using that, I place the plots using a system of ranges and rows, because it's easier for me to work with lines than to work directly with polygons of the shape of the plots. So this is what I draw. Once I have these two and I have the list of plots coming from my database, I can place the border plots. I can also place the experiment plots, and you'll see, for example, on that field, we have one of the specific. The plots for the 4 row plots that we have here, we are actually interested in only the 2 central rows. So the final polygons I will be using are these ones. And this is what I will be re-uploading to Solvi. This is what Igor was showing you on his field too. Once I have this, I can use the Solvi detections. So you can actually see both detections now. One detection is in red, that's the weeds detection, and the other detection is points, and you can see them in green there. And then that's when we can extract any measure that we want. You'll see that most of the measure I'll be showing you there are also extractable through Solvi. For the moment, I prefer to do it in QGIS because I can do many of them at the same time. But I'm sure in the future we could be also using Solvi for that. For example, this is just a number of plants by plots, so that's definitely something that Solvi is doing very well. If you look at that through the whole field, this is what you get. So, okay, that's good. Then you can see the width overlap also. So you can see, for example, that all fields on the left will have higher width overlap than on the right. The very weedy area is there, but fortunately we do not have any plots there. It's only borders, so that's great. We can also identify where the empty row strips are based on an arbitrary percentage of plants present compared to what we will be expecting. So these are all the rows which could be considered empty. So all the neighboring plots will be impacted by this. And then I spoke briefly about heterogeneity just before. This is a way of measuring it. If you take the plot and split it into parts, like for example here 4 parts and then 4 parts on the row next to it, so that's we have 8 parts in one plot of 2 rows. Then you can measure, for example, the average of a vegetation index into each of these squares, and you can, for example, take the standard deviation or any metrics like that is linked to variance of that matrix, and you can try and get an idea of the homogeneity of the plot using that. For example, if you have one row that is very small and one that is bigger, which happens quite often in the field, you can detect it using that. So that's another thing you can do. And then you can just aggregate that by plot. And that's it. So if I go back to my slides. So yeah, that's basically what we're doing at the moment. We're doing a bit more things also. I'm really focusing on that because the theme of the webinar was what happens in the beginning, right? Plant counts and everything. But so, of course, we'll be doing more things during the year. I also wanted to add quick slides on how the drone positively impacted our activity. So I purposely I chose to say all the positivity that are also negative, right? Sometimes you have new problems. We had problems in the past. We definitely have new problems using drones, but I'll just focus for now on the positive things. So first one is we do faster the things that we were already doing, right? So we were, for example, counting the plants on all of the field. That's something we've always been doing. We can still do that now, but expect faster because we're using the drones. Also, we need less people to do them. That can be important or not, depending on the size of your teams. Sometimes you need 5 people permanent in the team because the limiting factor is the fact that you need 5 people for counting all the plants on time when the field starts to grow. If all of a sudden you don't need that many people to do that, maybe you can switch the activities of the team, and that definitely happened also with us. And we resized and changed the activities of the different people of the team also due to the arrival of the drones. Also, we can do more of these things. If I take the example of counting plants again, we can do more of that, right? So if you have one extra field, now using drone, you could do that. Whereas in the past, you were not really able with the same size of team. So that's also something you can do. Also very important, we can reprocess or run verifications. And that's also kind of new. In the past, when we were going to the field, writing something, and then going back to the station and uploading that to our software, if we had doubts, like a value was strange or something, the only way to really check for that was to go back to the field and check that it was correct. Now that we have the images, it's a bit different. If you, for example, if you don't like the number of plants, or if you have a doubt, you can always just go back to the image, make sure that the detection was done properly, and maybe you can redo that. I don't know, in July or in August when the crops is very big. If you had to do that by hand in the past, it was a nightmare. To really validate the plants, you had a very short period of time where you could do it, and you could never go back to the field like it was at the beginning. So that's also is nice. And we can also measure new things, right? For example, if you use multispectral data, that's definitely not something you would have been able to use even if you had 100 people on the field. That's just something we cannot see. So that's just new things also, which are added by the drone. And also, I think that's the last one, but it's very important also, is the fact that we standardize the data using that. Because now we have the same drone flying at roughly the same height with the same camera settings throughout all of the stations, which are in different country. Whereas in the past, we had different people counting the plants or using other or rating anything other than that, using the kind of the same rules, but you are never 100% sure that everybody is understanding the rules exactly the same. So you always have some variation between the teams. And you also have a variation with yourself, I think, when you're rating something, because very often you start with the field and you're giving ratings. And it's also only when you arrive at the end of the field that you really know what the scale is, what was actually the worst plot, what was the best plot. So if you really wanted to rate the field correctly, you would really need to start again the field if you really wanted to do that, because it's by the end that you know exactly, okay, now I have an idea of the scale, now I know how to rate it. And this is completely eliminated by the fact that now it's just images, and you run the same algorithm on the images coming from the same drone on all the fields. So that's also a very nice way to standardize the data. As for the future, I think one of the main focus will be to solidify what already works, because gathering all that information, processing it on time, etc., even for the things that we know how to do, is still a challenge. And I'm sure for Solvig it is also to upload or get all that information. I'm sure if you ask Igor to just process one flight, you'll do it easily. But being able to create something that is able to process hundreds of flights at the same time, doing one simple thing, but just at the same time with many other fields, and also have everything being intuitive, etc. That's the hard part. So that's what we want to do on the things that we already kind of use. And then we still have an exploratory part, which is the interesting part also. So now we have multispectral imaging, thanks to Mavic 3M. There's a lot of data, right? For a normal field that could be 10 gigabytes for a flight at 20 meters with the RGB camera. It will be 50 to 60 gigabytes for the same flight with the multispectral camera. So it's a lot more data. See what's worth, what's not worth, and how to use it. So we'll see about that. And also we want to study a bit more data series. And there I was always speaking about one single flight, but you can actually perform more than one single flight over the season, and you can get some curves, you can get other metrics that you would not get if you had only one flight. So that's also very interesting, and we'll look into that in the future. And that's it for me. Igor, maybe I can give you back the
Yeah, thank you, Boris. I'm stealing the screen now. Let's see. All right. Thank you for your presentation. That was like you are really one of our power users doing some really advanced stuff. And yeah, I appreciate a lot all the feedback we get from you using our service and suggesting all the improvements at how we evolve our product and aim to support more and more use cases. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. If you have questions to me or Boris, you have our contact details here. If you would like to learn about the more about like use of drone technology in agricultural research, we have an ebook on our website. So if you just head to solvi.ag, you will see a button there and can download it and learn more. And now we will try to answer as many questions as we can. I've been asking a few there already, but for example, there was a question, how useful is the use of RTK in the drones? What experience do you have in that area, Boris?
It's quite limited right now because it's actually the first year that we have RTK with specific flights over the same field. So far, I think the experience was great. The difference, I don't think it's perfect. Like if I'm placing plot boundaries and then I'm flying again with RTK, I know the plot boundaries will be nearly exact, but not 100% exact. I think when I actually ran the test, the precision was like 5 centimeters, more or less. Whereas if you use just standard GPS, it was more like 1 meter or something. So obviously it's a lot better, but it's not perfect. So sometimes you still need to change it. But I think the big difference is that even if you need to shift a little bit the plots, the shift will be consistent throughout the whole field. That's my experience so far. And that changes a lot because when you were using normal GPS, if you had a shift, it could be still a small shift, but very often the shift was increasing the more you go to the left or increasing the more you go to the top. So you cannot just actually take your plots and move them 50 centimeters and they will be good. No, you had to move them 50 centimeters and then 10 meters up, you had to take all the remaining plots and then move them again and then move up. And the error was linear, right? And that takes a lot more time than just taking the plots and switching them like 50 centimeters. And from my experience so far, RTK is not perfect, but very often the error is just a constant. So it's very easy to just correct a little bit if you need. So yeah, it's a very good experience so far.
Right, so that's one use case for RTK. If you don't have RTK on your drone, you can also use ground control points.
Yeah.
Another area that we are currently investing in is the height measurements. And one of the ways to measure the height that we currently do is by trying to find the lowest point outside of each individual plot. But that doesn't work really well in later growth stages when, for example, especially like in corn trials, when you have like complete vegetation cover and don't see the ground level. But then we are working on implementing support for using elevation map from the early season flight where you see essentially the bare ground and then do the height calculations from it. And then RTK is obviously very important. If you want to subtract the data from one elevation map to another, it has to have high accuracy. But I'm sure the RTK technology on the drones will improve over time and the measurements will get more accurate. All right, so there was one question with the new law passed in the US surrounding DJI. What other drones would be best versus Mavic 3 multispectrum? I would say So mica sense sensors are great, and we've been having support for them for many years. They are not as integrated as the GI sensors, so you will need a bigger drone to fly them. Sensors like mica sense, Red Edge, Altum. You'll need to get a bigger drone like Matrice 200, 350, and then mount those sensors on them. But these sensors also have the sunshine sensor. You can use panel to calibrate the imagery. Otherwise, I think there is also Centera sensors for the multispectral imagery. Are you familiar with any other, Boris?
Not at the moment.
Not
No.
really. Okay. Great. Then there was question, can the tool count number of plants at any stage or only in the early stage? What's your experience?
That really, for me, it really depends on the crop. So I'm only working with corn and sunflower, but already it's very, very different. For corn, I think the window you have to count plants is a lot shorter. So ideally, you don't want all the plants to overlap when you're looking at them from above. As crop stage, I think that's 4 leaves or something in corn, depending on density, right? If you have a very close density, then your flying window is even narrower because the plants will be very small and they still will start to overlap. But that's really what you want to do. So it really depends on density. So that's why it's hard to really link it to a crop stage. I think the best is just to ask people to look at the row from above, and if they see plants starting to cross, that's really time to fly, because the more they cross, the harder it will be to count the plants. For sunflower, it is completely different because the sunflower is a lot easier to identify, and sometimes I think it's even easier to identify when it's like 1 meter big, and then you see the heads that is starting to emerge from the plants, and at the beginning is really at the center of the plants, and it's very distinct from the leaves around. So you can actually get very, very good counting with plants which are 1 meter tall. So I think it really depends on the crop. But yeah, again, for corn, very at the beginning, so you will need to fly low. That can take time, and you will need very good resolution. And for sunflower, you can do a lot more things.
Right. I would add to that the technology behind this plant counting tool is machine learning, and what it uses essentially is a visual pattern in the images. So it's not only looking at the color of the plants, but also at the shape. And as long as you can see the unique pattern about individual plants or whatever you want to count, weeds, for example, you can train the tool to detect that. So it's just a matter of capturing high enough resolution for your specific use case. And we had a couple of questions here on, is it possible to count pineapple plants? Yes, we have seen a lot of users doing that. Cotton balls or flowers or whatever you call them. That's a bit more tricky, but also possible. We had some users counting oil seed rape flowers that are quite small, so that works as well. Watermelons. So there was a question. Let's see. I would like to know if this method of collecting data with drones is effective for creeping plants like watermelon or sweet potato, because here we're most interested in the length of the vines and the size of the watermelons and the weight of the watermelons. So the creeping plants is a bit tricky, and the same applies to the vineyards. If the plants grow into each other and you don't anymore see where like one plant starts and another ends, that's the challenge. So the tool can still identify quite accurately just the canopy of the plants, but if they completely grown into each other, they will be detected as a single blob. But when it comes to watermelons, we have some customers doing really accurate size estimations in watermelons, so that works, estimating the size of the fruits. We've seen some experimenting with measuring onions after the harvest, so that can also work as long as imagery is good. So yeah, literally any type of crop, as long as you can see the individual plants. And I think there was also a question about cereal crops and oil seed rape. So that's more tricky because of the same reason. The plants in the very early growth stages grow into each other, and you can't anymore see the individual plants. Okay, so
I suggest a quick question also on the just asking what's the purpose of counting corn, and it's true, maybe I did not precise that why I'm counting the plants, or why is it so important for us. It's because we are running varietal trails, right? So we have different genetics. Each of the microplot is different genetic. And at the end of the year, we'll harvest all of them, and we will want to compare mainly the yield. And to compare the yield, we have first to make sure that we have the same number of plants, right? Because if one microplot had half the plants as the other, we're not actually measuring how good the genetic is. We are just measuring the fact that there was 50 plants in one and 100 in the other. So that's why counting the number of plants is so important for our activity. But it's true that it's not for all the activities, I guess.
Right, right. There was a question, have you ever missed the blue band in the workflow? So Mavic 3M doesn't have a blue band. Do you have any use cases where that would be useful?
For computing some vegetation index need the blue band. I guess you could use the blue band from the RGB camera because there's one. And I think so far when we had to compute vegetation indices which had needed a blue band, that's what we did. But you will have two types of raster, right? The resolution is not going to be the same. The resolution of the RGB camera is a lot better than the one from the multispectral camera. That was one of the question also. Which camera is supposed to be used for counting? I think you gave the answer at the beginning of the meeting, but yeah, again, what you want to use for counting, for detection in general, is usually very precise images. So you want to use the RGB camera, which has a lot more resolution. So yeah, but yeah, if you mix the two to get the blue band from one and then the rest from the other, you'll need to do some raster mathematics, but it can be done.
Right. There was also a question if you ever tried to do the tassel counts in corn.
We did, and we'll do that again this year. I think it works not as well as counting the sunflower heads, but it can still work, definitely. So yeah, that's something that works, but you need to fly quite low.
Right, okay. There was a question about using Matrice 350 and Altum PT, so with panchromatic bands. So we do support that at Solvi. In terms of altitude, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's not much about altitude, but the resolution that you need to get. So start with that, decide what kind of resolution you need to get, and then when you're doing the flight plan, you can provide the specifications for the Altum camera, or in some flight apps it will be already there, and then it will tell you which altitude you should fly at. All right, let's see if there are any other questions. When using the Mavic 3M for multispectral images, if we have a calibration panel, I believe in the last webinar suggested taking panel images before and after the flight. Do these calibration images get uploaded along with flight images, or is there a special process? No, that's exactly how it works. So you just upload them along with all other images, and during the processing, these images will be detected automatically and used for calibration. We need to get fairly accurate yield predictions. How close are with machine learning to assess likely yields at key interval? Which crops are we more advanced? Is that something that you're looking into, Boris? Like yield estimates and
Not really, because as I said at the end, we will harvest the microplots. So then the question is, if we really are able to estimate the yield, then maybe we can just not harvest them. That's a lot of time gains. So that would be interesting if we manage to do that. But so far from the papers I've seen, I don't think it's precise enough. Maybe it's precise enough to get just a ranking or something. So that could be for early stages of breeding. That could be enough. But so far, we did not decide to really plant fields knowing that we'll not harvest them, because we'll just be using the estimates of the yield. But for the future, that could be definitely useful, yeah.
right. There was one question, if the plant count prediction is not accurate, can the data be corrected? Yes, absolutely. Like I showed in the example there, you can correct the wrong detections, or if some plants were missed, by providing more examples. So the more training data you provide to the tool, the typically the better it will become. So that's totally possible. There was a question to you, Boris. With so many flights, how do you deal with the quality of the imagery? Do you provide training for pilots?
Yeah, we do, but it's quite basic training at the moment. I'm sure they could be trained more. But again, usually they are not like drone pilots or something at the beginning. They are trialing field technicians, and then they also learn to fly drones. And again, at the moment, I think we are very much relying on all the work that has been done by DJI. So now really the interface is very easy to use. And if we already set basic things like fly at 20 meters, use 70% overlap, 80% front overlap, so 70 side overlap, and do not fly above 2.5 meters per second. Already, if you're doing this, which is very easy to set, that's all the basic parameters you set when you're creating a new flight plan. If you do that, 90% of the time you will have good images. So at the moment we are relying on that. I'm sure we can get better and then be able to tweak all the camera parameters we've been testing to change the shutter speed and stuff like this. I'm sure you can get better, but at least if you're using very basic things, you will have good things, and this is what we are relying on at the moment.
Right. One question was if the counting tool works with several densities at the same time, or if you need to analyze them one by one. What's your experience?
Yeah, it's funny. We actually have density trials. So we have fields with different density on the same field. And usually it's based on detection, right? So if the plants are, you don't want to wait too much, right? Because if you have a density that is very high, then the plants will start to overlap very, very, very fast. So you may want to have a look at these trials to know when it's the proper time to fly, and you may want to fly lower for that reason. But then the detection is the plant detected is just a plant detected, so it can detect plants at lower density as it can on higher densities. And then it's just the number of points that you will have in your microplot or something that will be different, but it works for us at least. But yeah,
Right.
keep an eye on the highest density.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool thing about machine learning approach in general, rather than creating some sort of custom algorithms that maybe like use distance between the rows, distance between the plants. The approach is agnostic to those types of parameters and really looking at the pattern of individual plants, and they can be planted in rows, they can be planted in random order. It doesn't really matter. As long as you see the plants, you can train the tool to detect that. All right. Do you have any other questions? Have you seen any other questions, Bora, that you would like to answer?
I don't know. Someone was asking if I have experience with PPK and not RTK, but not with the drone. We tried that with the GNSS receiver just to get some specific points, and honestly, was working kind of well. But I really like it, RTK, and I think also RTK is something that is used by farmer globally, at least in Europe. I know that, and so the technology really works very well, and you have antennas everywhere, and that was also a good surprise for me. I was expecting maybe it would have some problems, maybe of connection between the drone and RTK, and so far it works really well. And I'm sure that's because all the farmers are using that in their tractors, so it's a technology that is really mature. And my experience with PPK was not with drone, but was not so good. So I would recommend if you have the possibility to use RTK whenever possible.
Right. I think Wingtra drones, the one that I had in one of the slides, that they have support for PPK, but then also I think they provide the software for post-processing of the imagery after the flight. Then you would use that workflow, and then once you post-process the images, upload them for stitching. I think somewhere was also a question about thermal imagery. So we do support thermal imagery in Solvi from MicroSense Altum and Altum PT. But also DJI 2 and 3 Enterprise series with thermal sensor. Have you ever seen any use cases for that in the field trials?
Not yet.
Like analyzing water stress or that
Could be,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
issues?
Could be interesting, yeah, but we've never tried that ourselves. But yeah, of course.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff, when it comes to different types of data, different types of indices, is still quite new, although we have been around for a couple of years now. I think more and more use cases will emerge, and a lot of companies are still using, like learning how to use all this data, how to interpret it. And I often get questions like, can I measure this specific trait of a specific crop? And I think like it's important to understand that the drone data doesn't do that automatically. Usually you just either look at the reflectance or you calculate some sort of vegetation index and then try to find the correlation with specific traits of the crops by doing the ground measurements and then comparing comparing the data. So that's usually how it works. So a lot of work in interpreting the data relies on doing these ground measurements and see what kind of outputs from the drone imagery correlate best with that. Awesome, great. So we have a lot of other questions. I will try to look through after the webinar and get back to everyone who asked them. So thank you very much for being so active. And again, I would like to thank everyone for attending this. I would like to thank you, Boris, for joining us. I already see a lot of great positive feedback. Looks like people really appreciate the knowledge that we shared with them. All right, thank you, everyone. Stay tuned for future webinars. And if you want to try Solvi, you can sign up on our website. You can download the handbook, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.